What's up, guys, and welcome back to a brand new episode of my podcast, Happy Days, with me, Callum Church. Today, I want to talk a little bit about death. Yes, I know what you're thinking, death. It is a little bit morbid and a little bit weird to be talking about on a self-development podcast. So why am I talking about death today? Well, first of all, I want to help you guys to be a little bit less fearful of death and hopefully to not fear death at all, because death truly isn't something to be afraid of, and it's actually a huge, huge positive. Now, it's important to remember that throughout our lives, we will pick up a certain number of limiting fears in our lives. So, for example, a limiting fear might be, you're scared of flying, so you don't get the opportunity to go around and travel the world as much as you would do. You'd be missing out on those experiences because of that fear. That's a limiting fear. Another one might be that you fear judgment, so you don't go ahead and set up that podcast, or you don't go ahead and set up that business or that YouTube channel or whatever it is you want to do. That limiting fear which holds you back and stops you from really living the life that you want to do. Now, a fear of death does exactly the same thing here. A fear of death is going to hold us back, and I'll explain to you why. But first of all, I want to talk about why death is actually, in fact, a positive. It's a massive positive. We need death in our lives because, well, for several reasons, but the main reason which I'm going to talk about is actually sort of explained quite beautifully from somewhere that you might not expect it to be. It's actually explained quite beautifully in a Marvel film, an MCU film. It's explained really beautifully in Doctor Strange. And the moment which I'm talking about in this film, if you do know it, like me, being a massive nerd, I love Marvel, but this really stood out to me as something quite powerful, actually, for such a fun, comic book movie. So the scene I'm talking about is the part where the Ancient One dies, where the Ancient One passes away. And in her final moments, she's stretching out time just to have a conversation with Doctor Strange and just experience the last few moments of her soon-to-be finished life. And there's a quote which I'm going to read out to you now, which really sums it up beautifully in just a sentence. And she says, just before she dies, "Death is what gives life meaning, to know your days are numbered." Now, let's just deep on that a little bit more now. So, death is what gives life meaning. This is what I'm going to try to explain to you guys in today's episode of the podcast, is the fact that the reason why death is so important is because it adds to life. You might think that your life coming to an end or this thing called death which takes away your life, you might see that as a negative, but it's important to remember that, sure, if we were to live forever, then that would eliminate one of our problems, right? We'd be able to live forever. But in doing so, quite often we forget and we fail to realise that sometimes getting rid of one problem in our lives can actually take away and cause other areas of our lives. And I'll go on to explain that a little bit more later. But anyway, more onto this point of death giving life meaning. It's to know that your days are numbered that gives you a sense of urgency in your life. It gives you a sense of, getting on with things. I mean, what's the point of getting out of bed in the morning every day if you know that life goes on forever? I mean, you could waste that day, but that wouldn't really matter, right? Because, hey, there's always tomorrow, and there's always the next day, and there's always the next day, and the next day, and the next day. Now, what is so beautiful about our lives coming to an end at one point is the fact that there isn't always tomorrow. In fact, you never know when your life might end. Who knows? I could go outside and get ran over by a bus, and that'll be it. So that's what gives me the urgency to go ahead and do this podcast. That's what gives me the urgency to go ahead and chase a career that I love, a life I love to live, to spend quality time with friends and actually try and seek that fulfillment which we all want in our lives. Because who wants to get to the end of their lives and think, shit, I wish I didn't do this, or shit, I should have done this differently, or shit, I mean, it kind of makes me think of that book, The 5 Regrets of the Dying, by, I think it's Bronnie Ware, who is, I believe she's a nurse, and this book is basically about her asking tons of old people who are on their deathbeds, close to death, and she asked them all the same question, which is, what is your biggest regret? And the one which comes out the most is, I wish I lived a life more true to myself. That is the top regret of the dying, you know. And the reason why these people got to the end of their lives and didn't live a life true to themselves and didn't live authentically and didn't live boldly and by what they wanted to do. The reason for that is because they probably slipped into the same mistake which many people slip into. And this is a shame. And the mistake which they slip into is falling into the trap of thinking that life goes on forever, or not thinking about death as so much so that you know that your days are numbered. You don't actively think about that and understand that and comprehend that, you know? I mean, sure, we all know that death is going to come at some point, but I think many people choose to just ignore that fact. Many people try to separate themselves from that truth and not think about that truth so that they can live in their own little ignorance, I suppose. You know, ignorance is bliss, right? I think that's the perfect example of why that phrase is true, you know? So don't get to the end of your life and regret it, you know? You got to be thinking about death and understand that death is coming, so that you live your life with that urgency and you live your life in a way which is true to yourself, a way which you rule your life, not someone else, not something else, not society. You live that life because it's your life, and ultimately you're going to have to pay the price at the end of the day. Speaking of prices, death, you know, it gives life meaning, sure, but it's also important to remember that life is a gift. Life is a total gift. When we entered the gates of life and we were all born, we didn't have to pay at the gate. We didn't have to pay for anything. We didn't buy a ticket. We didn't do nothing. Life costed us nothing. You know, we got given it. It's simply a gift. You know, if you were to win the lottery, if you knew the odds of you winning the lottery would be 1 in 400 trillion, would you take those odds? Would you buy a ticket and would you go ahead and you know, let's say you put in a fiver to try and win the lottery? Do you fancy your chances at winning that? Because you've won those odds before. Let me tell you, the odds of you being born, simply just being born and having a life right now, it's 1 in 400 trillion. Do you fancy those odds again? No, you don't. See, we are so incredibly lucky. We've all been gifted this life. And I don't think many people actually think about this. 1 in 400 trillion, are you mad? That's crazy. You're never, ever, ever going to get those odds again in your life. You know? You will not get those odds again in a very, very long time. You know? So why on earth would you waste your life? Why on earth would you spend your whole life worrying about the judgment of others? Why would you spend your whole life doing things which you don't enjoy? Why would you spend your whole life living in fear of certain things? You just can't. You simply can't, because when you're given such a gift as like that, you don't deserve it if you're just going to waste it. You honestly don't. You know, for every person that's on earth, there are 399, you know, 99, I can't even think of the number. It's such a big number, I can't even comprehend it right now. There's basically 400 trillion other people that didn't get that life. You got that life. Out of that 400 trillion, you got that life. Think of all the people that didn't get that life because you took their place. Think about that. Honestly, I mean, pause this podcast right now and just think about that for a moment. All of those people that didn't get a life, and you got it. How can you waste it? How can you? So, I mentioned earlier about the whole slipping into the trap of living, you know, thinking that life is going to last forever, or not thinking about the fact that death is going to come. And it's kind of like a game-breaking glitch in a video game. It's kind of like a game-breaking exploit or something like that. You know, I mean, we think that by living forever and having that would solve all of our problems, but yet it brings up so many others. Like, for example, when I was a kid, I used to play Call of Duty Zombies. I don't know how many of you people listening right now have played that, but basically, it's you've got to live as long as you can by shooting loads of zombies and staying alive, basically. That's what the game is. And there used to be certain glitches and exploits that you could do in this game, where you got in certain sections of the map or certain sections of the play area, where the zombies just couldn't get to you. They couldn't touch you. You'd be on like a ledge or something, and they couldn't reach you or something like that. And you just sit on that ledge and you shoot them and shoot them and shoot them. You go through all the different rounds and you just live forever. You could go to a ridiculously high round, set a high score, and that would be that. But the thing is, when you were doing this, it totally took away of the fun of it. The whole point of the game was the fact that you never knew when you might get caught by the zombies and die. That was what was so exciting about it. That was what was so fun. You had to be sharp and on the ball and make sure that you weren't getting caught out by a stray zombie somewhere. So when you live forever, it takes away that urgency to life. It takes away the meaning. Like that quote from the Ancient One in Doctor Strange says. It takes away the how precious it is. Because then it's just, whatever. There's always an extra day, It's also like, here's another analogy. It's also like, imagine you're in the desert, okay? Just imagine you're in the desert for a minute and you are extremely dehydrated. You're struggling and you've got to get to the other side of the desert in order to survive. And then all of a sudden, a magic genie pops out of the ground and he says, hey, I've got 2 options for you. The first option is a cup of water. The second option is a massive tank on the back of a pickup truck with a nice hose and tons of water inside of it. Having a finite life is like having that cup of water. That cup of water is your salvation. Okay, you can make it to the other end of the desert on that cup of water if you are careful with it. Okay. So, what would you do? You'd be really careful with the cup. You'd hold it really tight to your body. You would not be spilling none of that water. That would not be wasted for a second. You'd make sure that water, was used properly, and sensibly. Whereas if you're given this tank of water, you'll be out the back of the truck. You'd be having a shower. It would be spilling all over the floor. You might have a cup of water and spill it. And, who cares? Because that water, there's plenty more in the tank, right? So, kind of think of your life like this. Do you waste your life like the person with the tank, who's having a shower around the back of the middle of the desert? Or are you treating your life like the cup? Because so many people are pretending to be the guy with a truck, with a tank of water on the back of the truck and wasting it everywhere and not realising that actually everyone's only given a cup of water. Our lives are only a cup of water. So you can't waste it, We're never going to find fulfillment. We're never going to get to the other side of the desert if we're wasteful of what we've got, We have got to, really squeeze every little bit out of our lives in order to find that fulfillment which we want, So don't go spilling your water in the desert. Don't go wasting your life. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that it's going to last forever because it's just not. It's simply not. Now, for the last part of the podcast, I want to talk about a tattoo I'm going to get. I'm going to get a tattoo. I'm going to get my first tattoo. And this has been one of the things I've been thinking about recently because I've always wanted a tattoo. I've always liked the idea of having a tattoo. Something cool. It's just, it's art for your body, I guess, And I've always wanted it, like the idea, but always wanted it to be somewhat, meaningful. I don't want to just get, a animal on my arm or something like that. Or I don't want to just get, say, a bird. I was thinking about maybe getting a bird and that on my arm. Like, I don't know. I'm just not one of those guys. I want it to be meaningful and sensible. And I had a bit of a light bulb moment the other day in which I was reading a little bit of Stoic philosophy, and it sparked my mind on something which is really important for us to remember in our lives. And it actually gave me the idea of what I wanted to get tattooed on me. So I came to the realization that I wanted to get 2 Latin words tattooed to my arm. And these 2 words are memento mori. Now, what this means in Latin, it actually translates to remember death. Now, that might sound really morbid, and maybe it might sound quite weird to get tattooed on your arm. Remember death, right? But remembering that death is coming is actually really important, for the reasons that I've already spoke about on this podcast. I mean, think about how your decisions in life would be changed if you remembered death. Something which Stephen Bartlett spoke about in his book Happy Sexy Millionaire, which I've finished recently. On the last couple chapters or so, he spoke about this basically what I'm talking about now, about how life is precious and how you should in fact remember death and stuff like that. And he used the sort of visualization of having a sand timer basically floating around your head and following you around at all times. And that sand timer goes out when it comes to the end of your life. So imagine if you actually had that timer floating around your head every single day, and you could see all the sand, all the little grains of sand trickling down in between the hourglass. Think about how your life decisions would change if you had that following you around you all the whole time. Would you procrastinate with your work? Would you put off starting that business? Would you, live your life in anxiety and fear and such? Hell no, you'd be grabbing life by the reins and you'd be absolutely bossing it, living your life and making sure that every decision you make is the correct one. Maybe you need to spend that little bit of money and go on that holiday. Maybe you need to just say bollocks to it and do whatever it is you want to do without the fear of judgment. Maybe you just need to push yourself a little bit more. Imagine what your life would be like if you had that clock following you every single day, just for a year. Imagine where you'd be in a year's time if you really thought about the significance of your choices and your actions. You could be in a whole different place right now. You could be bossing it. It's crazy how much your life can change in a year. So imagine if you actually lived to the peak of your life. Imagine if you actually fulfilled your potential in just a year. You could be anywhere. You could be doing whatever you want. So that is why I want to get Memento Mori tattooed to me, because every time that I come in my life and I want to make a decision or doing whatever action it is in my life, I can just simply look down at my arm. I'm going to get it tattooed on my arm, probably here so that I can see it. I'm just on my forearm for those listening on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and such. So I'm just going to get it tattooed on my forearm, and it's just going to say Memento Mori. So every time that I come to make a decision in my life or I need to choose my actions carefully, I can look down at that and I can think about the fact that my life is coming to an end. My days are finite. My days are numbered. What's the best choice to make here? What's the best, action to take so that I really squeeze the most out of my life, Because, everyone says that life's short, but I don't quite entirely believe that. I don't entirely agree with that. And the reason why is because many of you are probably going to see this coming, but I love Seneca the Younger, the Stoic philosopher. He's one of my favourite philosophers. In fact, he is my favourite philosopher, and I bang on about him all the time on this podcast. But one of the most significant quotes, which sort of hangs around my memory all the time, is Seneca talking about how short life is, and he actually believes that life isn't short. We're just wasteful of it. We have a good amount of time allocated to us at the start of our lives for us to go out and do whatever the hell we want, experience whatever the hell we want, live our lives however the hell we want. And yet people waste it. They fall into the trap of thinking or forgetting that life is going to come to an end. They think that life's just going to go on forever. And it's not. And because of that, we waste it. If you had that timer around, like hanging around your head every single day, would you take an extra hour in bed? Would you do all these things which waste your time? Would you take all that shit from that toxic partner of yours? Would you take all that shit from that toxic friend? Would you take all that shit from that toxic job? No, you'd be out there. You'd be making that life for yourself, and you'd be smashing it. So that's what I'm going to finish today's episode on. It's just by reading this quote from Seneca, because I really want you guys to think about this, and I just think it's a really good place to finish on, because it's a quote which has personally had a lot of impact on me, and hopefully it will have a lot of impact on you. So here's what Seneca says. He says, it is not we have a short time... So here's what Seneca says. He says, it is not that we have a short time to live, but we waste a lot of it. Life is long enough, and a sufficiently generous amount has been given to us for the highest achievements if we were all well invested. But when it is wasted in heedless luxury and spent on no good activity, we are forced at last by death's final constraint to realise that it has passed away before we knew it was passing. So it is, we are not given a short life, but we make it short, and we were not ill-supplied, but wasteful of it. Life is long if you know how to use it. So with that, guys, that is the end of today's episode. I do truly hope you did enjoy it, as always. If you did, please consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, because it does honestly, truly help the show. Also, let me know your feedback. Drop me a DM on Instagram. My Instagram handle is @callum.g.church. I love hearing from you guys, so make sure you follow me on there. Also, follow my TikTok. My TikTok handle is @CallumChurch5. And with that, that's the end of today's episode. So again, I do truly hope you did enjoy today's episode, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care, guys. So there you go. That's the end of the show. If you enjoyed, make sure to subscribe on your podcasting app of choice so you can download and listen as each episode is released. If this episode helped you in any way, tell your friends, tell your family, maybe even leave a cheeky review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps the show. But that's all for now. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next episode, released shortly. Take care.